Thank you for bringing this all together this evening and safely. And in your name, we hope that everybody gets home safely. Help us all make a wise decision in the best interest of the citizens of Canby. In your name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I want to thank everybody for coming this evening. Hope you had a pleasant drive over. And we have a lot of stuff on our agenda. So first thing is, do we have any citizen input on non-agenda items? Okay. I would, if you wish to testify, there's some blue slips back in the back, and if you'll fill one of those out, that would be great. Is there, okay, we have to have approval for the minutes of the November 13th meeting.
Chair, I recommend approval of the minutes stated as you so called out.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Is there any new business? No new business. Okay, so first item, this is a public hearing, and we will consider a request for Redwood Landing subdivision. That would be SUB 17-06 at 1440, 1548, 1612, and 1758 North Redwood Street. This public hearing is continued from the November 13th, 2017 meeting. So I will read the, okay, the matter presently before the hearing body requires public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please fill out the public testimony card and give it to the recording secretary at the appropriate time. Please step forward to the microphone, state your name and interest in the matter. For those people other than the applicants that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please sign in on the sheet or speak up when we call for testimony. For a longer presentation, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have a total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will be given 5 minutes each, and the opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from hearing the present matter. Okay. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact.
I have visited the site.
You visited the site, okay. So, does any member of the audience have any questions for any of the commissioners regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? Okay. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, we'll have the staff report, and then questions, if any, by the hearing body or staff. Then we will open the public hearing for testimony. The applicant will have no more than 15 minutes. Then the proponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Opponents, not more than 5 minutes each. Neutral testimony, not more than 5 minutes each. And then rebuttal by the applicant, not more than 10 minutes. At that time, I will close the public testimony. We'll have any questions, if any, by the hearing body, and we will discuss and deliberate, and no additional testimony unless specifically allowed by the chair. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Any questions? Okay. Brian.
Thank you, Chair Savory, and good evening, Commissioners. The first public hearing that we have here is for the subdivision for the Redwood Landing proposed subdivision. I believe that it's 88 lots at this time. The lots are between 5,000 and 6,000 square feet in size, and it's located on the east side of North Redwood, about 2/3 of the way up towards Territorial Road. This is just an aerial of the area. The hatched area on this slide represents the area of the proposed preliminary plat. And you'll see in the middle, with frontage starting on North Redwood, there's an area of 3 tax lots that are excluded from being part of this plat. There was, not much more than a year ago, an annexation of 32 acres into the city. And so this is a good portion of that annexation area, but not all of it that's being proposed as a subdivision at this time. This also shows the blue line where the Willow Creek riparian corridor is, and the area to the east of that stream is part of the preliminary plat, but is indicated as future development tracts. And so they're not proposing any particular development at this time, but reserving that for the future, primarily because there's no access to it until a street is brought down that's coming from the Teakwood Street that's over in Willow Creek subdivision. And so there is a need for that access availability before this portion of their property can be developed. This is a representation of the proposed preliminary plat here. And looking east of that stream again, you can see where there's the riparian area. There's also wetlands around that, and then some steep slopes adjacent. And then you have a portion, basically the area that's east of the first street that runs north-south. You have the area that's actually being dedicated, 6-point-some acres, I don't remember exactly, as a dedicated park, which includes the riparian area, the wetlands, and some of the steep slopes, and also includes some area that was developable because it's not a steep slope or a wetlands or a stream. And they were able to secure through the North Redwood concept planning document that was worked on for over a year with a considerable public input to try to arrive at a system of making the parkland dedication from the various property owners to be done in an equitable manner. Since some property owners are dedicating over half of their property for park, while others are either not doing any or a very small portion. And so the concept planning process developed a formula for how they were going to help make each property owner whole, and how it works out with system development charges and that type of thing. So what that also did was allow the transfer of density of the developable part of the parkland into creating increased number of lots that wouldn't otherwise be allowed or in the R1 zone district. So you have the R1 zone as the underlying zone of this, which has typically a minimum 7,000 square foot lot size. But through the particulars of adopting the North Redwood concept plan, and to give the as much consideration as we possibly could to getting the park dedicated because of its importance to the community as a whole and the amenity that it'll provide just for this subdivision as well, they allowed that transfer of development rights. That is important because it has resulted in lots of 5,000 to 6,000 square foot size. The plan also indicated that the absolute minimum lot size that would be allowed is 5,000 square feet. And so you won't find any of the lots below that 5,000 square foot. That was the minimum dictated by the plan. The lots that are in the middle that are surrounded by this plat, if you look at this preliminary plat, they're showing you what we call a shadow plat. It's to let you see how that area might develop in the future. They're not proposing the plat to include those 3 tax lots in the middle, but they're letting you show the most likely scenario of how that would develop based upon the dead-end streets that this plat is going to provide on each side, both the south and the north, to those 3 lots that aren't participating in this preliminary plat. That was one of the reasons the item was delayed from the original public hearing, is so there was some additional consideration given to how that would affect the future developability of that particular area and working out the nuances of that. And it appears at this point in time that they've satisfied those particular property owners by slightly changing the position of those internal streets. And what I was going to point out is you'll see that those lots are larger. They have to meet the minimum R1 zone 7,000 square foot lot size because those lots aren't dedicating any parkland, therefore they can't transfer any of the development rights to that otherwise developable parkland. So they're required to meet that lot size. So you'll have some variance as this area develops in the lot sizes as we go further north and we go south because of that whole feature that was critical doing this concept plan is trying to figure out how to make people whole with what they were parkland. Let me see, there was a Couple things else I think I wanted to point out. We've gotten quite a bit of, and probably I've heard from the neighborhood meeting, from the minutes of that, and some other individual comments. One of the biggest concerns people have is the condition of North Redwood Street. And a lot of probably misconception of what the ability of the city or of the Planning Commission to make corrections to that. The fact that it's substandard. To begin with, it's not a city street, portions of it. But what we have is the requirements for proposed plating to make one half of the adjacent street on Redwood built to city standards. So the subdivision regulations are going to guarantee we have that half of street, and usually it's a half plus, so that we have two-way traffic. It's not a full width of a street, but it's a little more than halfway, will be totally reconstructed and built to a city standard for thickness and with a curb and with an adjacent 6-foot wide sidewalk on the one side. So I just kind of want to make that clear to people. Everyone is asking that why would you even allow the development to go in without improving the rest of the street? And the main answer to that is we don't have, it's not considered legal in terms of court cases that have been tested in the past all over Oregon, and that you need to have a rational nexus for the impact that that development's having and what improvements they need to make. And if we were to start going too far away from the development, they're paying more than their proportional share, and it becomes a city's responsibility then to make those others improvements. And so the city does have a capital improvements plan. We do make street improvements, but they're very limited because we have limited funds, and so we have to prioritize those. Given enough time, we might eventually make improvements to other sections of Redwood or other deficient streets in the city, even though development isn't being planned. But that funding level is very low compared to the needs in town. And so I just wanted to explain that. The other thing that's related to the North Redwood Street is concern about the volume of traffic, and of course that traffic being added to a substandard street, which everybody recognizes. There's been a lot of concern on the part of the Traffic Safety Commission and even this commission about the intersection of North Redwood and Territorial. Every citizen has said they feel like it's already substandard and is congested and dangerous and causes a safety problem. One of those reasons that we've discussed is that coming out of the wastewater treatment or public works facilities, that street is offset. So it looks a little odd just when you're there because it's not an exact lined up intersection. But we did have a full traffic study that was done with this request. I added a specific task to that to study that intersection. And the results of that study came out indicating that the volume of traffic that not only this proposed subdivision, but if all of the land on the east side of North Redwood were to develop, as the concept plan indicates, that there still wouldn't be a warrant, as traffic engineers call it, for erecting anything like a signal light at that intersection. You need to have a certain amount of volume before it justifies that it will improve the safety. There was even discussion in the traffic study about a four-way stop. That's something that could be done, but they definitely don't recommend it because of the difference in volume of traffic between what's on Territorial and what's on North Redwood. Even with this development, the traffic is much greater on North Territorial, and it causes actually safety concerns when you don't have similar traffics. One of the intersections that we've improved with a four-way stop is 10th Avenue and North Ivy, and it's been wonderful. I don't know how many of you have gone through that intersection since it became four-way stop, and you feel so much safer. But those are almost equal traffic on those two streets, and so it works great. The traffic engineers say it's not necessarily a good thing to do when the traffic volumes are so disparate. So I wanted to point out those issues, that we have looked at those, and those recommendations are there. The city does have the ability to put up stop signs if they want to, regardless of what the traffic studies say. And so I think the Traffic Safety Commission's still looking at that issue and might make a recommendation to the council at some point in the future. So one of the other, let me make sure there wasn't something else here. As a result of some recent discussions and as a result of some public input that we've received that was written, I had a discussion with the applicant about, it might be better to see in the previous, the east-west streets and the street, north-south street along the park are all considered maybe a little bit more major streets, especially the street North Sycamore as proposed along the park. It's considered as a kind of spine that might be a future transit route, a way for people to catch a transit. We don't have a route going through at this point, but sometime in the future we may. Those streets are designated on the proposed preliminary plat at this time as being full standard width local streets. They're 34 feet wide and they have a 52-foot right-of-way, I believe. The three internal north-south streets are currently shown as only 28-foot wide pavement. With a discussion with the applicant today, we pointed out that through practice, even though our street cross-section for a low-volume local street, which these would qualify for, less than 500 trips per day, our cross-section in our adopted TSP indicates that if you use a 28-foot wide pavement, that you could have 7-foot parallel parking on each side of that. But if you do such, then you don't have room for 2 cars to pass. And the fire department, through several subdivisions we've done in the past 4 years, has absolutely, and we finally have agreed to not allow parking on both sides when you propose 28-foot wide street. Primarily because of the difficulty with emergency access if you do have parking on both sides. So we're talking with the applicant today. It sounds like, and I'll let them confirm, that they've agreed to change those internal 3 streets to a 34-foot, now I'm getting confused which it is, a standard local street width that will allow parking on both sides. And they can do that. The result will be 3 foot of the sidewalks that will be separated from the curb by a planter strip. And we require 6-foot wide sidewalks now. Will be outside of the dedicated right-of-way. They'll be in a pedestrian easement in the front yards of these particular lots. And that is not unusual. We've done that many times in Canby, where the sidewalks actually fall outside of the right-of-way on a pedestrian easement. So the next thing I wanted to review is the future map. And it shows potential roadways pretty much a little bit different, but similar to what's in the adopted concept plan for the properties to the south. And it's just to let you know that the way they're doing stub streets are going to allow a similar road pattern as was adopted in the concept plan. Then we go up to the north, and the proposed future street plan in that area is pretty much representing what was in the adopted concept plan. About the only way possible to reach the very northern property is through a cul-de-sac. The concept plan strongly discourages the use of cul-de-sacs. However, it was necessary in this particular lot, because of its kind of isolatedness, that was the only reasonable means to provide access to that particular property. You have some written testimony from that property owner indicating they feel like their property is being limited by this proposed plan. And our only response is that in the planning process, with our consultants and everyone assisting us, that this was the best that they could think of to provide access for that particular property. The other lots that you see along the proposed east-west, which would be a continuation of the road along the park, it's mentioned in that concept plan several times that that is a very important route going along the park and spanning the full distance of this North Redwood planning area. And so it indicated that that was very important as subdivisions came in, to make sure that you have that critical length or circulatory provision within the plan. There has been some concern on those other remaining property owners to the north that the proposed plat will limit the future development possibilities for those properties. And we had the same issue with the properties in the middle that were surrounded. At this point, staff is relying on the work that we did through the public hearings process in adopting the concept plan to try to balance those issues and interests of each individual property the best we could. And of course, it's very difficult to do a reasonable subdivision or concept plan layout that's going to treat every single property owner in a manner that would totally allow each one to totally maximize their future developability. And that's really the whole process of the concept planning, is to do the best we can to try to balance that, not to ever say that we've done the best for everybody when they're trying to think how they could develop their property in the future. But it's good to see a shadow plat so that you can see there is some potential reasonable manner to develop the adjacent properties and get the circulatory road system that the plan asked for, which was do as much of a grid layout as you could, do as few cul-de-sacs as you could, do the best you could to place streets along property lines, and allow and recognize the future development or redevelopment of all the properties. So we feel like we've done that to the best of our ability with the way the concept plan was adopted. It may not be as good as some individual property owners would like to see. I've heard that the property owners to the north would like to preserve and keep their houses. And there's several in the proposed plat area that they've worked around existing houses as well. So this application you're looking at tonight, they are not locking in the street patterns outside of the subdivision, but they are setting pretty much where they're likely to go. So that's about all I'll say about that, I guess. Staff has recommended approval for the proposed preliminary plat layout. We've got a few general conditions that were listed in the staff report. Some of these are pretty standard, that they'll, before any work starts, they're going to go through our pre-construction conference process. And number two, we always make sure that we've indicated that they're going to have to follow the applicable standards of the Public Works Design Standards. And three is final design plans will conform to the comments that we have in the record here from our city engineer in his memorandum of October 20th, 2017. And that they will abide by some comments that were supplied for the record by the National Gas Company. And then number five, that the few recommendations that did come out of the traffic study from DKS, that those would also be followed. And then we noted, and I will, on number 10 is a condition that isn't in the staff report right now. It's in the body of the report, it was mentioned. It was a change to the staff report from when it was originally published. I put that in there just to emphasize that there was a proposed place in the plat. I don't know if I can point it out or not, because it doesn't show up on these drawings. And I don't have my pointer since it's not on here, but they were proposing right off the end of Northeast 17th Avenue, where it runs into the park, that down the slope there would be a water quality facility and detention for storm drainage that then would eventually overflow through the wetlands and into the creek. The water quality facility helps filter any harmful chemicals and such before it flows into the creek. So that's a good thing. But what we're proposing is, and the city engineer, which we've got a condition that they follow the city engineers to satisfy his requests, that they'd pull that facility up away from down the steep slope, because it's something that does need maintenance over time. And the city has agreed to provide that maintenance for that detention facility, because it's actually working to filter the runoff from the public streets. All the other drainage is required to be handled on site in the individual lots themselves. So we need access. So it needs to be near a street and not down over a steep slope where we can get to it for maintenance. Another option that we're offering is that it be on a separate tract within the platted lot areas themselves. Make one of the lots this water quality facility, if it's possible, with the flow of the topography and such. So either way is okay with us, and so we'll see a relocation of that. I don't think it's something that you necessarily need to worry about at this point, since they have options on how to do that, and we look at those details with a full drainage plan at the construction stage of the development. I did want to point out that on condition 7, as currently read, we'll get the confirmation from the applicant, but that's what I was talking about before, is that they are changing those north-south internal streets to be a full local street standard rather than the 28-foot here. So you might want to make a note of that if you get down to a proposed action on this later. There will need to be turnarounds at all these stub streets if the Canby Fire Department determines that it exceeds 150-foot distance and feels like it is necessary. We've done that. They would all be considered temporary, and once the streets continue on through to the middle portion that's being surrounded and that's platted, they would then become, the lots where the turnarounds are at would then become available for development. We'll see. We don't have the definitive indication from the fire department at this time. So we put the condition in. So if he asks for it in the final construction stage, they will have to do those turnarounds temporarily. I think the only other thing I was going to mention is on North Redwood, they are dedicating 10 foot of additional right-of-way along this side of the street so that we can build that city standard half street. But it's the total right-of-way when you get, that will be there, since the west side is generally developed at this time, will not accommodate any on-street parking. It's going to accommodate 2 nice city standard lanes and 2 nice bicycle lanes on each side, and a little extra, but not enough extra to allow on-street parking. So I wanted you to be aware of that. And that was another reason that I think I convinced the applicant to go with parking on both sides of all streets to make sure that we don't have a parking problem, because they can't go anywhere else. And so we don't want to lower the future quality of this development by not having adequate parking within it, because they can't go out onto Redwood to park. Are there any questions about the staff report?
Questions? Nope. Okay, thank you, Brian. We will now hear from the proponents, leading off with the developer. There you go. Please state your name and address, please.
Turn your mic on.
Oh, my mic is on. Oh, and turn your mic on. And there you go.
Good evening. My name is Rick Givens. I'm a planning consultant for the applicants. My address is 18680 Sunblaze Drive, Oregon City. As you know, we requested a continuance last month so that we could work on some issues relating to concerns that property owners in the area had. And that interior portion of the property, those owners went to the extent of hiring an engineering firm to do a layout that they felt best served their future development. And so we took that to heart and completely revised our plan to match into their plan. So this plan now before you gives the street stubs in the location that they preferred, so that it would give them the best access for the future development of those 3 properties. We also revised the plan to provide for the, I believe it's North Spruce Street, where it extends to the north. Originally, we had put that street further to the east in the location that was shown on the North Redwood plan. We tried to match it up almost exactly. And we became aware that one of the concerns by the owner of the property to the north was that's heading right towards his house. So that made perfect sense to adjust it a little bit to the west, so that we now, if you go to the future street plan, it misses that house and provides for a front yard area for that property immediately to the north. So We also, since the last Planning Commission meeting on this, prepared this future street plan. And as Brian said, I want everybody who owns properties to the north or south to understand this is not a specific development proposal for their properties. Rather, it's to show conceptually that the street stubs that we are providing on our property will allow for a reasonable plan that fits the North Redwood plan as closely as possible. And we're not proposing that it be developed in exactly this fashion. Nobody's requiring that they develop their property. They can propose to the city plans to amend the North Redwood plan if they wish at the future date. So nothing's being committed here. All we're doing is showing that we've done our due diligence to demonstrate that we're trying to do a design for our property that fits the North Redwood plan as closely as possible. We are transferring density as the North Redwood plan envisioned, as Brian discussed. We have a very large area of the property that is going to be dedicated for park as called for in the North Redwood plan. And there are provisions specifically spelled out in the North Redwood plan as to allowable transfer of density from the park dedication to other parts of the site. And we followed those very carefully. The calculations were provided to staff and they reviewed them. The plans that we have provided include lots as small as 5,000 square feet, which is the minimum that's allowed. I believe we transferred, my recollection is correct, 14 lots total. And in doing that, we're trying to be careful. The concern is, we've got an area of the site that's surrounded by this development that is not part of our site, but will be developed in the future with 7,000 square foot lots. So what we're trying to do is come up with a balance that allows for the density to be recaptured in the way that the plan calls for, and provides lots that we feel will allow development of homes that will be consistent with what will be developed on those 7,000 square foot lots. And in doing that, we're trying to balance it by asking for some consideration as to reduced street widths and corresponding reduction of side yard setbacks primarily. We want to be sure that these homes can all have homes that will allow for two-car at a minimum, and probably a lot of them will have two-car with a tandem, third car behind them. Icon builds a lot of homes of that type. We want to be able to provide homes that are, in the range of 2,000 to 3,000 square feet and quality homes. And we believe that the adjustments that we're asking for, that are allowed for in the code, allow us to put a product on there that will do that and that will fit in a way that will make sure that people's home values on other off-site properties are maintained. So I think that's pretty much it as an overview of the development. As Brian mentioned, we talked today about this issue of north-south streets, and I believe it also really applies to the extension of, 15th Street, I believe. My vision is not what it used to be. Where we've got, that one we were proposing 34-foot streets. The other ones we were proposing 28, which as called for in the plan. We propose all of them be 34-foot wide streets. And as Brian mentioned, that will result in sidewalk extending a little bit into the lot and a public easement, with that, as he noted, has been done in a lot of subdivisions in Canby. So we're good with that. The additional cost of the street we think is warranted because it will assure that everybody in here has a place to park on street, in front of their place. And we feel that's a good compromise to be worked out here. So with that, we would agree that condition number 7 could be reworded to reflect the fact that we've been providing 34-foot wide streets on all of the streets of the development, that we would provide the 4.5-foot planter strip and 6-foot sidewalks, and that the sidewalks can extend 3 feet into the adjoining lots on a pedestrian easement. Condition 9 talks about the turnarounds for the interior streets, and that's primarily looking at those northerly streets coming off the lower section of the subdivision. They're right at a little over 150 feet long. We believe we can work with the fire department rather than building a turnaround at the end of those. Since it is so close, we quite often have sprinkled the homes in those situations. And that usually provides the assurance that the fire department has that those homes will be adequately protected. So we will work with the fire department. If they disagree, we will build turnarounds. Condition 10, you rewrote from what the old one used to say, and
that one can be eliminated.
Yeah, the old condition 10 has now been replaced with the new condition 10 you added regarding the storm detention facilities, and we have no problem with that. We believe we can locate that in an area that is right along the road and put it in a tract that will work well for the city. That shouldn't be any problem at all. Condition number 32 says the applicant must specify at the public hearing which lots are proposed for dwelling setback reduction and identify which lots are proposed for minimum lot frontage of 50 feet in order for the Planning Commission to make a detailed decision. So I went through that tonight, and really I think really we need to give you all the lots that are less than 60 feet is really what we're talking about, right Brian? Because 60 feet would be the normal standard for the R7 development. And actually, in this instance, it's easier to give you the ones that aren't part of the, because most of them are. Looking at the site plan, lot number 20 would meet the 60-foot frontage, lot 23, lot 78, lot 70, and lots 45, 50, 51, 53, 58, 59, and 64 would all meet the 60-foot lot width requirement. So all of the rest we're asking for a reduction, not all of them to 50 feet, but below the 60-foot threshold. And we're asking actually that the 5-foot setback rather than 7-foot be allowed on any lot less than the 60-foot width. That again gives us the flexibility to make sure that we can put home product in there that will be consistent with all of the neighborhood, not just ours. Then finally, condition number 34 talks about the applicant shall dedicate 6.45 acres for public park. I think the actual number is a little different than that. This was from the old plan we had. It's actually a little more, I think, on the current plan, but it may go down a little bit again if we make a tract for the stormwater detention. So I would ask that that condition not be worded quite so tightly, that shall maybe allow some flexibility. Dedicate at least 6 acres, I think, would be consistent, which is actually more than what the roadway plan required in this area. And also, we probably should add something to the fact that it's subject to the reimbursement provisions that are provided in the North Redwood plan. There's a provision that allows for credit that would come against parked SDCs for this area as part of the North Redwood plan. So for the dedication, there's an offsetting credit against the city's normal system development charge for parks. And we want to make sure that it's not just out dedication, but that it's consistent with what the plan calls for. I think that's all the comments I had regarding the staff report. I'm sure there'll be some issues raised by the people who are here in attendance tonight, and we'll try to address those in rebuttal. But I hope you'll see that we have tried to be good neighbors, that we've tried to revise the plan to make it as consistent with the plan and as consistent with their wishes for what they want to do with their properties as we can. We want to build a good neighborhood that works for everybody. Thank you.
Any questions?
Nope.
No questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Let's see. I have Cynthia Lyles as also a proponent.
I am,
Okay.
with exceptions.
Well, if you'll state your name and address.
Cynthia Lyles, 1608 North Redwood Street. So my first I have a question. Does the new street width affect the size of our lots?
No,
Okay,
it results in a practical sense. It doesn't change the lot size. It just has a portion of the width of the sidewalk will be on the property. So therefore, it will be slightly closer to the front of the home than it was otherwise going to be with a 28-foot wide street.
okay. So it affects the size of the yard.
Yeah, so, yeah, the usable yard, it does, because the sidewalk's closer, but it doesn't change the lot size.
Okay, okay. So we're in favor of the development, but our concern really is how we got to the density transfer that allowed the first development basically to be 89 lots. So I was on the committee for the master development concept plan, as were all of my neighbors, I think. And I don't think this is in the final concept plan, but is it Walker Macy that was your engineer? Brian?
What's your question is? That
Well,
was
was
one of
Walker
the-
Macy your engineer?
Not city
city?
engineers. He was a consultant hired to help with the concept planning process.
So even they envisioned a total of 115 lots in the R1 area. So it'll just be interesting to see what happens for the city with the rest of this development when we start doing density transfer all the way up in the medium density area and high density. So we just have concerns about how we got here to the first development in the R1 zone having 89 lots of that entire area to the north. The city's own engineer envisioned a total of 115 lots. Does that make sense?
So you're wondering how you got from 115 down to 89?
No,
Oh, the
89 are going in the first development.
Okay.
Okay. We just don't think the city envisioned with the density transfer issue for basically a medium density neighborhood to go into a low density zoned area. Does that make sense? Okay. Because this was supposed to be R1 low density down on this end, okay, up on this end. And the first development going in gets a density transfer that allows them to basically put an entire development in that's medium density.
Rather than low density,
Yes,
yes.
okay? So we're in favor of our neighbors developing. We're just really surprised that the entire development gets to be medium density because of the calculations that the city provided. It's not their fault. The city allowed for this to happen, but it's going to happen throughout the whole development if it's not dealt with somehow.
If you want me to respond at this point, the best response I can give you is that in the planning process, again, in order to assure that we had the carrots, so to speak, to make sure that we could get the park dedication, because that's what was deemed most important in planning for this area, is that we were able to secure the park land dedication. So we protect this riparian corridor, and is that we allowed this transfer of density. And talking with Matilda Diaz, our senior planner, who was the one leading this project, I didn't attend very few of the actual meetings, and so I wasn't privy to some of the addendums and appendixes that are part of this planning process, the original memos that were provided. She indicated that they may not have tried to look at what the maximum possibility would be. They did design one scenario of what a total layout might be of the whole plan and how many lots that might be, but that was just one scenario. It could be less or it could be more. But they indicated that they were providing incentives for this dedication to occur, and it would impact those properties that had the greatest amount of area defined as wanting to be dedicated as park. And so we're starting with one of the property owners that have the greatest amount of park area on them. I think maybe there might be one to the north that has even more, but I haven't really evaluated them that way. But this certainly has some of the most, the greatest amount of parkland on it, so you're going to end up with this greater density. I certainly had no concept of how dense or how many additional lots would be transferred until we actually did this. And I was somewhat surprised myself that it resulted in 5,000 to 6,000 lots for the entire subdivision. But as he said, he was able to transfer the 14 lots because of our evaluation, and there was a drawing in the plan that explained exactly how this was going to happen and how we would calculate the reimbursement, describing the difference in what's an actual natural park area with the stream and wetlands that you couldn't develop no matter what, because our regulations don't allow you to develop wetlands in a stream. And then defining those areas that had some potential for development, and that included any area that was less than a 25% slope that wasn't a wetlands or a stream. And so there was considerable amount of land that they're dedicating as a park that allowed them then to transfer the density. And I can't say that I knew how much that was going to end up being for each property. And that's why they only provided a range. They didn't say exactly what it was going to end up being. But that was the decision made in adopting those principles within the concept plan, that we were going to allow less than the underlying zoning lot size in order to make sure we got the park dedication, and we did it in a fair manner, that they got a reasonable development value when it impacted their lot tremendously, to be forced to give it to the city.
Well, I mean, I know that's where we are, but when the language, when we were in the concept meetings, was there would be some transfer, a few lots. I think there was even discussion about the PDC plus density transfer, a combination. So, I mean, that's what we understood as stakeholders. I think we probably all understood the same thing. I think maybe even the city thought it wouldn't be this big of a deal. I don't know. But I feel like we're cramming a lot of lots onto this property.
I might add that when I asked Matilda, who knows the most about this, she said, we knew this was a possibility. That's why we put the minimum 5,000 square foot lot size on it, not knowing exactly how it would turn out. So they put that minimum on there so that there would be a limit to how.
So then what's the minimum in
If you
the,
could,
oh, I'm sorry.
that's-
What's the minimum in the, talk to
talk
Brian.
to me.
Okay.
He's listening, but,
I know.
you know, he'll answer,
He
but,
answers all the questions. Medium density. Was there a provision for that?
I don't know, I haven't studied that. It's in the plan somewhere. I can't tell you.
Okay,
And it may be different. I don't know.
because, let's see.
We're not dealing with that
The
right
en-
now, so.
The engineer for the city envisioned about a total of 237 lots for this whole, I think it's 68-acre parcel on North Redwood. So when you start talking density transfer, we're talking about a lot more than 237 lots.
so would you say that it's a concern of, in general, of
Yeah.
the neighborhood, that you've gone from
Yeah,
low density to a more medium density situation, from 89 to 115, did you say?
well, the city envisioned, I think, that the whole R1 section would be about 115 lots, and just the first development is going to be 89. So, anybody that's got parkland to donate, the same thing's gonna happen, and it may happen on the north, or in the south as well, because medium density could turn into high density. So, traffic, schools, you know,
Will impact it, yes.
yeah. So, but we're in favor of our neighbors developing. We're just concerned about the lot size, cramming this many homes onto this property, and the potential of it devaluing our property, since we sit right in the middle of this medium-density neighborhood now. Okay?
Thank you. Before you go, any other questions? Thank you very much. Let me see if I have any other comments. I have a Daniel Webb, but are you wanting, because you said multiple subjects, is this one of the ones that you wanted to talk? Okay, all right, but this is what you want to talk on, is the Redwood? Okay, so I'm putting you with the other ones. Okay, so, then I have a Carol Palmer. No, these are for opponents, there are no other. This is for opponents? Yes. Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay, there you go, okay. So Daniel, if you'll state your name and address, that'd be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Daniel Webb, 1109 Southwest First Avenue, Suite F, number 742, here in Canby. I'm a real estate consultant, and I represent three of the property owners, Linda Thomas at 1864 North Redwood, Andrew Jarmer at 1860 North Redwood, and Carol Virgin at 1868 North Redwood. These three properties are all directly north of the proposed subdivision. The shadow plat you'll see there above, just north of the subdivision, where Sycamore makes the turn and back out to Redwood Street at 18th. The three properties I'm referring to are the ones directly to the north, and then the Bergen property is one with the cul-de-sac drawn in on it. I want to address several items: street alignment, stormwater management, protection of the Willow Creek, the fish-bearing stream, and also a fence on the north boundary of the site through the wetlands and creek area. I want to first talk about the stormwater management. Per policy 9R, Canby shall attempt to minimize the adverse impacts of new development on fish and wildlife habitats. I don't think that's been addressed at all in any comments I've seen from staff. As far as public facilities go, to assure there's an adequate provision of storm drainage services to meet the needs of the residents and property owners of Canby. The applicant is proposing to discharge all the stormwater from the subdivision into Willow Creek. Willow Creek is a fish-bearing stream which flows directly into the Willamette River. The creek and related wetlands is home to a number of animal species, including but not limited to beaver, fox, weasel, blue heron, and deer, and there's more. But in recent years, the creek has become more shallow from an influx of sand and silt, which we believe primarily comes from a subdivision where the railroad tracks cross Redwood Street. I don't remember the name of the subdivision. It was built about 6 or 8 years ago, and they used a sand filter system for their stormwater, and most of it's ended up in the creek because of this. We're concerned that the stream will not be able to disperse the contaminated water from the subdivision fast enough to prevent the stream and adjacent wetlands from becoming a wasteland. The applicant has indicated that they will utilize the existing wetlands to filter and protect the creek, and also pre-treat the water to reduce sediment and pollutions before it enters the creek. We don't believe the pollution from the petrochemicals from a couple of miles of streets, 89 driveways, the antifreeze, fertilizer, weed sprays, etc., can be treated effectively to prevent contamination of the stream and the wetlands. We feel this plan does not serve to protect the public or the stream involved. This is, however, this is 2017, not 1970. We feel the city and the public would be better served by the applicant utilizing modern techniques such as bioswales in the streetscape, rain gardens on individual lots, dry wells, etc. The remaining stormwater could be piped north on Redwood Street to the stormwater basin fish eddy site owned by the city, which is what it's there for. There is currently an existing storm line in Redwood Street which follows this route, and there needs to be storm water facilities in place to serve the additional developments in the concept area. Can you pull up page 15 of the concept plan? Is that possible?
I don't have the concept plan here on the computer.
Can't pull it up?
No.
Okay.
Didn't come prepared to bring the whole.
Well, the reason I wanted to pull it up, it has a picture of the concept plan, what a street layout would look like, sidewalks, et cetera, 4.5-foot planter strips on each side of the street, along with bioswales, et cetera. This was very clear when we worked on it. I was on the committee as a stakeholder committee on this, and I think it was pretty clear to other members that this is what we were going to see, that this stormwater was going to be handled on site, and if it could not all be handled on site, then a final solution would be to pipe it down to the fish eddy area. Lady previously commented on lot sizes. That was also a little bit of a misconception on the committee's point. I guess we had no idea how this was going to affect this when we go from 7,000 down to close to 5,000 square foot lots. This again is not anything close to what the committees had foreseen when we worked on the concept plan. And they're also talking about smaller setbacks as well. Narrow streets have already been addressed, so I'll pass on that. I had a note here to talk about it, but I'll pass on that. Redwood Street, I think, has been beat on enough. I think everybody knows that that's going to be an issue. the fence on the north boundary, and the reason we like to see that is to protect the public. If they're not protected, once that park is established, there'll be access to the entire city of Canby to go down through those wetlands, the creek side, and venture north into private property, and no way to stop them short of, we have a little field fence there now to prevent, to keep our horses in, but that's not going to keep the public out. So there needs to be something on that north boundary in order to keep the public in the park. I want to talk at length probably about this future extension of Sycamore. With the way that originally when the concept plan was done, I was under the understanding, and I've done a lot of developing myself, that this was a concept plan, not a development plan. Within a concept plan gives you, the developer, an idea of what they want, but it's not carved in stone. And it appears that this future street is carved in stone right now. I've talked to Brian about it at length, and they feel that this extension of Sycamore has to go to the intersection of 18th, otherwise nothing here is going to work. If this happens, what will happen in the long term is that will never be built. And the reason it will never be built is because there isn't a developer in his right mind that would ever buy any of those properties to develop them, because the cost of the street would far outweigh any potential for development. If you take the one in the southwest, I'm talking about these properties up above the subdivision. If you take the one in the southeast corner, there would not be room for even one additional lot on that one. The next one over to the west, there might be room for two. The one after that, there might be room for two. And then the final one, which is owned by, and I lost his name, he has a very nice home on that one, and that would be no chance at all for him to build anything on his. So it won't be built because nobody's going to have any interest in developing it. The street's going to take up the vast majority of any buildable land. All three of these properties, four of these properties, all have access to Redwood Street down. So that would probably continue the way it is now on a private drive. But that street won't ever be built because it's not economically feasible. If the Planning Commission passes this, which will require that be built at some point in time, that creates a monetary damage to all these property owners. And I want you to strongly think about that, because it devalues each one of those properties. It removes their development potential. There could be a rerouting of the street, which I've already sent in previous comments, which you have and I'm sure read, about some realignment. And it would just be the 17th would be the northerly connection to Redwood rather than the 18th extension. And then the moving of a couple of the interiors of the north streets a little bit one way or another, so they line up with property lines so that those properties to the north can be feasibly developed. I think that pretty much covers my comments.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Webb? Thank you very much. Now, do we have Carol Palmer? Okay. We have Jerry Corcoran. You will step forward. Name and address, please.
Jerry Corcoran, 1586 North Redwood Street, Canby. And I'm one of the parcels in the middle of this development. And I really have two problems with it. As far as I can tell, I'm the only landowner that is going to lose their house out of this situation, as North River Alder Street runs through my living room. And that's a bit concerning. And then I'm also concerned with the density changing from low density to medium density.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Corcoran? Thank you very much. Mr. Bob Canby, excuse me if I got it wrong, Canberra? You could step forward and your name and address, please.
My name's Robert Canberra. I go by Bob Canberra. I live at 1338 North Maple. And I'm here not really opposing per se the development, but I'm asking that there be something added to one of the requirements as stated in the present plan. I'm requesting the project be amended to request a second traffic impact study after half the houses are built in the development to verify that no mitigating requirements will be needed on both or either the intersection of Redwood and Territorial or Redwood and 99. The present study, I fully appreciate, was well done. It meets national standards for statistical verifications, you know. But in reality, for a common person, it was based on 2 days of 2 hours gathering data, okay? And then they use national comparative studies to extrapolate and make a judgment. Well, I live on Maple, frequently use Territorial, and I know how realistically those streets are busy. All I'm asking is that there be some realistic recognition of a possible problem, that the study with its theoretical models comes back after you've built 40-something houses and have those cars that you've approved will have on-street parking plus access to the houses that will be able to park 3 additional cars there, all flooding out onto those 2 territorial roads, and to reevaluate their impact and to see if there really truly is concern about mitigating problems such as need for traffic lights or something. I guess that's all I have to say.
So, Brian, has that ever?
No, that would be highly unusual, and the traffic study that was done actually indicated that with full development of the full 64 acres, that Redwood would be able to handle and the expected full development of the entire concept plan, and would still not warrant a stop signal at Territorial. And so that's all I can do, is that they're using, we hire an excellent traffic engineering firm that does this kind of thing for busy communities all up and down the West Coast. And this was their assessment.
Are we talking about DKS?
Yes.
Okay.
So my response to that is, I guess I just want it on the record.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just want it on the record when I believe in my heart that's going to be a problem. Thank you.
So, did you have a question?
No, I was just giving you a note.
The traffic.
Sir, I believe this is more of a traffic safety issue committee item, that you should probably address this too, because this is actually kind of out of our sphere of influence, I believe. And I think you'd be better served talking to those folks.
I think under your rules, okay, a development that is going through has to mitigate some of the possible problems that are going to possibly occur, which is why they had a traffic study in the first place. Their premises that they use to come up with their results, I know are nationally recognized as acceptable. I'm just saying, practically speaking, I don't understand it, okay? And I think it would be reasonable, given the huge development that's going on here and what we already know, that they come back a second time once they've developed at half to confirm what they've already said. And that's what I'm just saying.
So let me clarify just a little bit more, because this is an important issue, and I know that it's not just Bob that's concerned about it, is that the normal process would be when the middle properties come in for a subdivision, we have them do another traffic study. When the adjacent properties come in, we'll have them do another traffic study. And I actually have the ability to waive that traffic study, but maybe I won't do that because of this concern and the need to study that additional impacts over time. And so as long as I'm here, I'll keep that in mind, because that is the typical thing. Each subdivision that's over about 10 lots in size is going to have to do a traffic study, and we'll get those that way. The other thing is I'm not going to tell you that people aren't going to be upset and concerned with the additional traffic, because there will be a lot of additional traffic, but the street is actually designed to handle that traffic, and it's the nature of what is happening all across the Portland metro area. As people come in town, we measure with our traffic studies, just like you said. It's all about, is there something that needs to be mitigated? And we have adopted level of service in our standards. And so we allow the streets to get more and more and more congested until they get to that lowest common accepted standard. And at that point, they have to mitigate. And so until we get to the point where people are just pulling their hairs out, that's when they're going to have to put the signal light, widen the streets, or whatever it is. Until we get to that point, that's how it works.
Glad you are being diligent about being aware of it, and I hope with each development that comes before you that you require the same kind of diligent traffic studies that will give us the note when the little frog is dead in the hot water because the heat got slowly turned up and it didn't realize that it was being cooked. So I leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. You come forward, state your name and address.
Carol Palmer.
And you're Carol Palmer.
Right, I am. And I live on the, in a development on the east side, or excuse me, the west side of Redwood, so in the Postal Wade Estates. I just wanted to follow up what Mr. Canby was talking about. The traffic study sort of shocked all of us that it came back and recommended that there were no changes needed. One of the things that, if you have been on Redwood at all, I'd like to point out for those of you that haven't been there, that is the on-ramp and the off-ramp for all of the city maintenance vehicles, including the utility, Canby utility, as they're cutting through and getting onto Territorial. So that's a whole lot of traffic that you don't have on some other streets that we get on Redwood. The other thing I'd like to point out is that it's also cut-through traffic for trucks that want to go from 99E to Territorial. We get a lot of those on there too. So, and there are the farmers with the tractors that want to go from Territorial across 99E. Those folks all use Redwood too. So those are the kinds of things that you might not be aware of, but I would like to reinforce what Mr. Canby said and ask that there be future traffic studies. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you, Carol. Okay, those are all the proponents, and Opponents, got the proponents, and I got opponents. And is there anybody that would like to speak as a neutral? Oh, I didn't have.
There's some more over here.
Oh, okay, and, okay, come forward. Are you together?
Yeah, for 38 years.
Oh, I got you on that one. Oh, okay, sure. So, if you'll state your name and address.
My name is Joe Recht, and this is my husband Eric Recht, and our address is 1594 North Redwood Street, Canby, Oregon. We are one of the lots surrounded by the proposed development. I'd like to begin by thanking you for this opportunity to come and express our concerns. We purchased our property 27 years ago, knowing full well that we were within the urban growth boundary, which meant eventually our land would be developed. And so at this time, we knew this was coming, and we are not opposed to the idea of development. We are grateful that the city was farsighted enough to engage a consultant to develop a concept plan that would help to make equity and fairness and a good outcome for the city over the longer term. As sometimes is said, I grew up on a farm, and we call this the final rotation. It's the final use of the land for many, many years, so we're very interested in having a good outcome overall. We participated in the development of the plan, of the concept plan, and supported the outcome, as many did. We were presented with a plan of R1 density, 7,000 square foot lots, similar to Postal Estates directly across the street, and similar to 19th Court, just north of the proposed development. A walkable community with streets, sidewalks, and accessibility for service vehicles. We recognized at the time that there was some language allowing certain exceptions for the 7,000 square foot standard lot size, excuse me, to accommodate existing structures and topographical realities of the site. We hired a civil engineer to design a layout that would meet the 7,000 square foot lot requirement. We did not anticipate that the language that allowed for some exceptions to the lot size be hijacked into a layout where 5,000 square foot lots are the rule and not the exception. I would like to draw, and I brought, you probably have copies of this, but this was part of the concept plan that came out and showed the R1 section of this part of the overall 62 acres and 115 lots in total. And the 6 acres that's in the middle there is going to be maybe 15 or maybe
24 lots.
24 lots. I don't know where the other 75 lots or more are going to come from that are going to be R1. There's not going to be any left that are R1. So this is not at all in the spirit of what was presented. The concept plan enjoyed broad community support. And as I said, this plan does not meet the spirit of the law. And apparently they sharpened the pencil and it does meet the actual letter of the law. But I contend that that was not the spirit of the law. I believe that ICON is running away with a loophole and not honoring the vision that was laid out in the concept plan. While we are a lesser-sized property, we do not feel that we are the tail trying to wag the dog. Rather, we are attempting to keep the dog on a leash, that leash being the concept plan. In closing, this is just another development for ICON. They will develop and move on. We will be left with devalued property in a neighborhood far from the standard that was agreed on according to the concept plan. We oppose this plan as presented, due entirely to the substandard lot sizes. And then just, if I may add a few more remarks during the presentation this evening, my understanding, as was discussed, that there would be reimbursement through parks fees to compensate those that were giving up land for the parkland. So there would be some kind of an assessment when we developed our property that we would put money into a pool, and those property owners that were giving up land, they would receive some money out of that pool. And so now I hear, and then the idea of density set aside was not really presented as for the full development, more on an exception basis was my misunderstanding, apparently. But now, not only are they asking for full extent of density possible, but they're also asking for a waiver of parks development charges. I would like to have a study on exactly what financial compensation they're getting for their property land. What kind of set aside on the systems development charges are they actually going to get? And what is the value of the added lots that they are getting? And is that actually more than the compensation of the land of property that could never have been built on in the first place, much of it? And another question that came up during this evening is talking about the runoff situation and having something along the creek that would take care of the street water runoff, but that each house would be taking care of its own runoff on site. If we are putting large houses on small lots, how are those small lots going to accommodate runoff from larger homes and not put an added burden on the runoff that is only the mitigation that's going to happen, was my understanding from the planning director, is that that would be for street runoff only. So I'm having some concerns just with runoff issues. And now my husband is going to bring up.
Well, I think you talked about most of it.
So at 38 years of marriage, I guess that,
I don't expect to get a word in edgewise.
I understand.
At any rate, the one thing that I was going to talk about, and it just is an area that for a layman is very difficult to understand, and it was discussed by Rick Givens in his presentation, but there's a formula apparently for these SDC fees based on appraised. I mean, I could read this whole thing and it wouldn't make any more sense to me after I read it, but the one line that I wonder about is, if the property owner's land contribution is greater than the SDC's owed, then the North Redwood account reimburses the landowner. Has anybody done an assessment or an appraisal or an estimate as to whether ICON will be getting money out of the North Redwood account, or whether they will be owing something to the Redwood account? Has anybody done that type of a study on the parkland?
The applicant has done a rough calculation at this time. We have not gotten into that because the condition of approval that's indicated in the staff report is that they shall follow the formula that's outlined and was presented in the staff report. I mean, it's not clear, but it's outlined exactly how we're supposed to do this calculation, what they get a credit for, and it's done in a manner that doesn't allow them to double dip, as there's an implication, is that you get the transfer of density for the additional lots, but you don't also get SDC credits for those additional lots. You're only going to get credit for one time for the land that you're dedicating for parks. That's how it normally works, is that if you dedicate the formula in our code the full amount of parkland, then you don't have to pay any parks SDCs because you gave us land instead. But we're not going to give them double dipping type of arrangement. The formula says you're not doing both. But I haven't done that calculation right now to see whether we're actually going to owe them money because of the amount of parkland they've dedicated. Rick may know because I haven't done that yet.
Any questions for?
Can we see your map from your original?
This is in the concept plan on page 336 through 338.
We don't have that.
Okay,
That's why I'll give it back to you, but I think
You're
we'd
welcome
all
to
like to see that.
Yeah.
Give it to Tyler, he could pass it down.
There was nowhere during the development of this concept plan that this outcome was ever even suggested, other than some vague reference to density transfer.
So were you under the impression that this would be generally a low-density development?
Yes, in fact, one of the maps in the concept plan shows that it has different colorations. Closest to the railroad tracks was like a dark yellow, then kind of a mustard, and then kind of a light yellow R1.
This?
That wasn't it.
No, that's in our packet.
I didn't bring that one. But this clearly is not consistent with
That probably.
all of the materials, and it was not as presented. And I feel like we're going to a technicality, and we're going to shave every little lot that we can out of that technicality, but that's not the spirit of the concept plan.
We're changing a low-density area into a medium-density area, which you said that, those very words, I think, Chairman. I mean, that's the concern, is the concept seemed to be a low-density subdivision, and now through this transfer of density, it's become a medium density, except for the 6 acres right in the middle, which is only 10% of the whole.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Unless there are other questions. I don't want to leave anybody out, even if you did not fill out a little blue card. So if you are neutral or opposed to the development, now is the time to step forward. Okay? And come forward and state your name and address, please.
I'll try and be brief. Sharon Weaver, I live 1839 North Teakwood, so I'm behind the development. That's my lot, actually, in the corner there. So there has been a lot of discussion. I had a few points, a lot of good points made. I guess I'm neutral. I'm in favor of development. I'm not thrilled with the development as it stands right now. A lot of it had to do with the density, which there's been some I have kind of the same concerns. It was, when we went through the planning commission, it was going to be R1, and I appreciate that there's a park, but now we have a lot more houses, packed in a lot denser, so I think that doesn't feel like that felt with what we thought we were approving. I'm also concerned about the impact of the park and onto the adjacent wetlands from how are we going to protect people. This plan here actually shows a bridge running right through the water, and if you've not been there, it actually dives down. So from a safety perspective, how do we keep people from walking through the wetlands, from destroying the wetlands, from turning into a little party zone, and from a safety from the people that are on the border? I am concerned about that, and I don't know how that's been addressed. From keeping people through there. The traffic study, I actually am okay with I'm fine with I don't think the stop sign, my issue isn't with the stop sign, but more around the visibility, because of the Malala, what is that called? The Malala Park is right down the road, and there are a lot of people that walk back and forth, and there's actually not very good visibility on that intersection, and I don't think the traffic study with just looking at how much traffic is there.
Are you talking about the Malala logging road?
Yes, that. So, but Territorial is a major road. There's a lot of people that walk down over the intersection of Redwood, and there's not very good visibility. There's not very good lighting. There's kind of a park there. So I would be concerned about the safety of the people that are walking along the road there, and how are we actually, and if the safety of the traffic study actually took that into account. I think they're counting cars. At least when I read the report, that's what they're doing. They're not like looking at the visibility and what type of usage there is on that road. Those were my main points.
Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Before we get to rebuttal, does anybody else have anything that they would like to? Okay. Would you like your opportunity to rebuttal? I know you did it before. If you could state your name and address, that would be great.
For the record, Rick Givens. I'm never quite sure how to address these concerns where people have a disconnect between what they've understood a plan would do and what the technicalities of what a plan does. It's all hard situation, because my job as a consultant is to read what the code says and do a plan that matches what the code says. And that's what we did here. We read the North Redwood plan, and we looked very exactly at the language contained in the plan and what it allows for. And, you know, the folks who are selling these properties expect to get the dollar that they need for their properties, and it costs money, and so you have to get densities that make it work. The plan calls for the ability to transfer density from the park dedication. We aren't making it up. It's specifically contained in the language. Our application goes through the calculations. Staff's looked at that, agreed that we've done the calculations correctly. I would note, too, that the city of Canby has a planned unit development ordinance that allows for density transfers in other areas, too. This isn't unique to North Redwood. Quite often the case where you've got a natural feature where you transfer densities in order to get open space. In this case, the city wants a park there, so it's a little different than, you know, the typical open space kind of development, but this isn't unique to here, is my point. I would estimate off the top of my head that the average lot size in the development is somewhere between 5,500 and 6,000 square feet. You know, we have some bigger lots and quite a few that are 5,000, but if you were to average them out, I think you'd come out. If you look at the overall density over the entire property, we're 6 acres of being dedicated for the park. It's below what a typical R1 development would achieve, because you average over the entire lot area. As I've said, you know, in my earlier remarks, ICON is aware of the fact that they're trying to fit in with, you know, we've got our 1.5, whatever it is, to below us there. We've got folks who, because they don't have density transfer available to them, are going to be standard 7,000 square foot lots. So what we're trying to do is bridge that as best we can here by providing lots and setbacks that allow us to put a product on these lots that will be very compatible with the neighborhood. Just turning to some of the specific comments here. First, regarding the traffic study. You know, when we approached the city, they said we had the option of either retaining our own traffic consultant, and then the city would pay their traffic consultant to review what our traffic consultant did. We didn't do that. We went with the second option. They said we could give the city the money. The city would retain their own traffic consultant, DKS, to do the traffic study. I've never talked with anybody at DKS regarding this project. I know they're an excellent firm that does excellent work all over the city, Portland area. And so we've had absolutely no input into the recommendations that they generated here. As Brian noted, they indicated that there's an adequate capacity not only for this project, but for all of the projects in the North Redwood concept plan. It's not even close as far as signal warrants and those kinds of things. So we don't believe there's any reason to suggest that we would break this project in half at some point and come back with another traffic study. I don't think that would even be legal to do, to require a condition of approval that couldn't be carried out within the appeal period. Another point that was raised regarding stormwater treatment and concern that we were going to be releasing pollutants into the Willow Creek Basin. First of all, we are proposing to use rain gardens on the property. That's what the city's management plan calls for. As you know, Canby is blessed with soils that perk pretty well, and so we will be using individual rain gardens on the lots. It's not unusual to be on lots as small as 5,000 square feet, and in these soil conditions, and to handle the roof runoffs on site. So that will be done. Secondly, I would note that the natural drainage from this site is towards Willow Creek. We're not redirecting any water anywhere. It's a matter of meeting city requirements for treatment of storm and detention of stormwater, so that the rate of runoff from the site remains at about the same rate as what is currently existing. And we'll be doing that by developing a detention system within the area that's currently shown as park. Part of it will be carved out on a track per that condition 10, and that will have a detention basin in it where water, it'll have plants and the various things that they do these days. I'm not an engineer, but they do not only to detain the water, but to treat it so that what comes off of it is standards for release back into the natural environment. Willow Creek is currently receiving all of this water, and that's where the water will continue to go, which is what Oregon water law requires. You have to keep things within the drainage basin in which they occur. So it'll be the runoff from the streets will go to a storm sewer system that will go to the detention facility where there'll be plantings that will treat the storm water before it releases. It'll provide an area for during peak runoff for water to back up, and then it'll be metered out at the rate at which natural runoff would occur from the site. So by doing that, you keep it from having the impacts that one of the gentlemen was talking about tonight. I would also note that we do have the 4.5-foot planter strips that he mentioned. That those will be developed in the property. He also wanted fencing along the north property line through the wetlands. I don't believe that would be something that would be consistent with wetland development. Typically, you don't want to be putting fences out there in areas that are subject to inundation and have water flow and things. You create a mess. So that will become dedicated to the city of Canby as park area, nature park. The area that we have shown the trail system there is directly from the North Redwood plan. And if there's a bridge built across there, it would be built if the city wants it, or not if the city doesn't want it, but it would provide for a crossing at some point, which is what land called for. And that's all we were trying to illustrate on this diagram, is that our plan can consistently meet and calls for. I did not really understand his concern about Sycamore, other than obviously that it does, when it lines up with 18, it does and would require the removal of the house at that intersection, or perhaps lifting it up, relocating it in another spot on the site. But we're taking out houses on our property as well. It's not unusual in development, as you know, that when the assumption here is that each of these properties is going to develop individually, and that may well not be what happens in the future, just as it's not happening here. We originally came in with just the 9.5 acres of the one property on the northern side, and eventually Mr. Manuel wanted to sell, and then another property owner wanted to sell, so it grew, and that's quite often what happens when we get into developing properties, and then you look at what fits best for the overall area. If they want to do something different there that fits better with their property, more power to them. We're not saying they have to develop it exactly this way. Mr. Corcoran, I was a little, we didn't call for the street to go through his house. That was the neighbors in the middle that told us through their engineer that's where they wanted that street to go. So,
did they ask Mr. Corcoran's opinion on that?
I asked that question. I asked that question specifically. They said he was okay with it. To my knowledge, yes, but they may have some different discussions among themselves. I'll just point out that we specifically tried to go around his house, leave him a plan. I submitted a plan to Brian that I felt gave them the same general density. They still wanted this plan. So that's what we did. We revised to fit with what those neighbors told us through their engineer was their plan for the area. Again, there's no requirement that Mr. Corcoran ever sell his house and build a road through it. I do think that at such time as that property is developed, it's not unreasonable to expect, given the lot configuration, that a new developer would not mind sacrificing, paying him the value of his property with the house and sacrifice that house and build those additional lots. It wouldn't be out of character at all with what's happening in the metro area for that to happen. Let me see if I've gone through everybody. I think it all primarily comes down to the issue of the density. Most people here were saying that they didn't mind developing the site, they didn't like the density. We're doing what the plan calls for.
I'm concerned about the kind of the disconnect from the impression that some of these folks had that this was going to be a low-density development and has become a medium-density development. And I understand the formula for how you arrive there, but I'm not so sure that it was adequately communicated to the folks.
Well, I would agree with that.
And maybe...
I think that looking at the plans that were presented in the North Redwood plan, those plans did not adequately reflect what the code language in there talks about as far as transfer of density. I don't know why that happened the way it did, but it didn't really reflect it. I would note, that if those central properties were a part of this project, you'd average it out over a bigger area, but we can only do what we can do. We're doing what the code says, and that's frankly what we should be allowed to do. We should be allowed to develop the property consistent with an adopted plan and the provisions laid out in that plan. Oh, there was also concern about whether or not we were going to be owed money on park SDCs, and no, we won't. Just the amount of what we would have to be paying would be reduced. The calculations, as Brian noted, take out the value of the land for the units that you are transferring. And so the 14 units that are transferring, you would take out the land value of that. And then you come up with the formula that's given in the code for, the value of wetland versus the value of unconstrained land. And it's simple math. And that'll be something that we'll be submitting to the city and work out prior to final plat. But we really think that the density here is consistent overall with low-density residential development. It's not unique here that density is being clustered. There are other provisions in the code that allow for it to be done elsewhere. The code specifically allows for what we're proposing, and ICON is committed to building a good neighborhood. They build them all over, and they build excellent neighborhoods with good houses. This is not going to be some rinky-dinky development, and so there should not be concern that this development is somehow going to be out of character in terms of the quality of the homes that's going to be built in there, because that's not the case.
Any questions?
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. This time I will close the public hearing portion of this, and we will move on to deliberation and questions.
So I've got a question for Ryan. Help see if you can clarify this a little bit for me and maybe some of the other commissioners. So by them dedicating this park is why we're allowing them to drop the size of lots, correct? So by the dedication of the park. But then also by dedication of that same land for a park, they get a reduction in SDC fees. So isn't that a sense double dipping as well?
So they're getting credit for the amount of parkland they're dedicating. They're not getting
an additional credit for the lots that were transferred.
No, I'm saying
density.
we're giving them the reduction in lot sizes because they're dedicating parkland, correct?
Right, that's part of the transfer.
Mm-hmm.
That's that concept that if they would have developed where they're dedicating the park and spread their lots out, they would have met the 7,000 square
Mm-hmm.
foot size. But since they're clustering them over here, then they have to make them smaller to get the same number of lots.
Okay, but then at the same time for that, let's call it, 6 acres of land that we're giving them the clarification for that, they also get a credit back for SDC fees.
Right, you take the total number of lots that they're doing and you add up what the individual SDC is, the parks SDC for those, and you're giving them, we're not allowing them to use the transferred lots.
Okay, so it'd be like, say, just layman's terms, half of it's going for the transferred lots, the other half would be for.
I think that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was looking for clarification on. Thank you.
Derek?
Well, it's one of those situations where I certainly feel for the folks that were going into this plan and being a part of that plan and spending the time that everybody spent towards that. But Brian, my understanding is we can't change what has been written as far as what is code here.
No, I think the input that we've gotten from the citizens and even the developer's planning consultant could very well be true, that all of the input and participation and the maps that were shown and such, this was a complicated process, and so much of the emphasis was on how they were going to deal with this park dedication, and it obviously didn't come across that this clustering and transfer of density, when turned into code language, was going to allow this much to happen. It surprised me. And this study, we had quite a number of professional consultants that were working as a team in those public hearing meetings, trying to relay the different aspects, and the parks was just one of them, because we had all the other issues that you heard, and the road circulation issues, and how we were going to deal with not disturbing the wetlands, and how we were going to get the leftover parcels developed, that the tax lot goes from Redwood all the way across the stream over to the other side that isn't accessible, and how we were going to bring in a road there and how that would work. And the main issue that's come out and came out at that plan was that we couldn't anticipate who would develop first, whether they would go together with their neighbors. For instance, if the middle property owners were part of this request, they wouldn't be having 7,000 square foot lots. There would be something slightly larger across the whole area. And so we couldn't figure out every one of those scenarios and how it would work. The ideal scenario is everybody annex at once and everybody sell to a developer at one time, and then the plan would be implemented exactly as it was envisioned. But without that, who knows what was going to happen? At least that was my assessment as I listened almost as a citizen during the process. So, yeah, there probably were some unexpected aspects that they couldn't account for, not knowing who would come in. And it was a surprise to me to see a proposal with the middle not participating. I'd never seen a subdivision like that proposed before, but it's all contiguous, it works. But it does result in an interesting development pattern, smaller lots surrounding larger lots, all in an underlying R1 zone. I would have never anticipated that happening.
but it seems to meet the provisions of the code.
Well, I was on this body 3 years ago when we first addressed this issue, and I had some reservations about it then. I still do. One of the questions I raised, and I know nobody here has this answer, the one gentleman addressed Willow Creek issues, and that was a big item on my agenda, and I asked about, several years ago, Parks Department was having trouble maintaining, and I believe they still are, the existing properties that they have. We bring a new one in. It's going to be fairly extensive, a large parcel of land that comes under their jurisdiction. How are they going to maintain this if they can't maintain what they have now? The answer I got was, we'll deal with it when we get there. And I think that's still the answer I'm going to get if I was to ask that question again today. Another issue I have is if we're densitying this partial that's R1, what's going to happen when we get to the R1.5s and the R2s south of this? Again, who knows? As Brian said, he didn't expect this to occur, what we have in front of us now. Unfortunately, it fills the squares, it meets all of the requirements. So I guess, again, it makes my heart heavy to approve these things, but I guess I'm going to have to.
Andre.
I share a lot of the same concerns as Commissioner Sirlett. As being on the Parks and Rec Board previously, with the budget cut for parks maintenance, it's difficult to accept new parks and then not have the funds to maintain them. Someone had suggested stop accepting new parks because there are no funds to maintain them. But that's maybe a separate issue from this. And according to the North Redwood Development Concept Plan that was prepared in 2015 on page 16, it does mention under the alternative lot layouts heading that if the alternative lot layout option is used, the average minimum lot size may be reduced to 5,000 square feet after subtracting access tracks. So it seems like that's fairly clear that they could be reducing their lots down to 5,000 square feet. So it seems fairly clear to me.
Well, I looked at the original concept map that you said was agreed to with all the neighbors, and then this map, and we all have a problem with this density thing, but it looked to me around your center section, the lots were bigger. They looked more close to 7,000. No, I mean the Icons developing larger lots around yours, and all the, not all of them maybe, but most of them, I only looked at it briefly, but all the real small lots are down in the south portion, one right after another down bordering, I believe, the higher density areas. They meet the code. Not a lot. I mean, I don't think a lot of that parkland could be developed anyway, but they are abiding by the rule as it is written. So I would approve it.
Well, I would agree with Mr. Boatwright. I would fault the developer only for not being clear on the lot density portion of this. So many people that thought it was going to be 7,000 square foot lots. and now we're down to 5,000 as an average. Clearly, it meets the code, and I think that our job here is that if it meets the code, we have to approve it. That's the rules. And so I will entertain a motion to approve this.
I make a motion to approve Redwood Landing subdivision SUB 17-06 with a change in, I think it was condition 7 to the 34-foot.
You could even consider eliminating condition 7 because it refers to following the engineer's comments on his memorandum, which says that all streets shall be 34 feet in width.
Or to eliminate condition 7 and all other conditions in the staff report approved.
Have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Oppose it. So it passes, and there you go. Well, this is America. And I would, you can, it's not part of the public record.
All right, if I just, I have one additional thing to say.
Okay. I'm,
She's on her own.
yeah, well, I'm afraid that in this case, she's always probably been.
Anyway, I just wanted to say that, without naming names, there was a member of the planning staff that wrote those particular rules. And it's my understanding that that person worked in conjunction with Alan Manuel, who is a relation to one of the owners of this property. And I believe that it was written intentionally, knowing what they were planning on doing. It wasn't done in just a vacuum. She was given guidance, and I believe it was with intent. I'll just say that.
Well, if you, don't go away. You can't leave it at that. If you feel like you have an ethics complaint, I suggest strongly that you file an ethics complaint, because that would be a serious breach of
Protocol, yes.
protocol, yeah. So I would suggest that you do that if you feel that strongly about it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now consider a request for a site and design review, conditional use permit, planned unit development DR 17-07 /CUP 1706 /PUD 1701 to construct a fitness building, pool pavilion, golf cart storage building, and parking lot improvements to add 60 new parking spaces at Willamette Valley Country Club, that's 900 Country Club Place. So, I know that no one wants to hear this again, but you're going to have to anyway. The matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please fill out the public testimony card and give to the recording secretary. At the appropriate time, please step forward to the microphone, state your name and interest in the matter. For those people other than the applicants that are interested in testifying as either proponents or opponents, please sign in on the sheet or speak up when we call for testimony. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have 15 minutes total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will be given 5 minutes each. The opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Temporary testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated in the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from hearing the present matter. Okay, I have visited the golf course and actually have played a round or two. I am going to continue in this process. Ex parte contact. If any member of the hearing body has had an ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of the contact at this time.
I have jogged by the site along the logging road trail multiple times.
And we're all glad to see that you keep in shape. I wish I was too. So, does any member of the audience have any questions for commissioners regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? Okay. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, Brian will give us a staff report, and then there will be questions by the hearing body. The applicant will then have not more than 15 minutes, proponents not more than 5 minutes each, opponents not more than 5 minutes each, those considering themselves neutral on the matter, not more than 5 minutes each, and then rebuttal by the applicant not more than 10 minutes. At that time, I will close the public testimony. Then we will have questions and deliberation by the hearing body. Then a decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions about the procedure? Okay. Brian.
Okay, we'll get started here. The Willamette Valley Country Club is proposing a new fitness center with an outdoor swimming pool and a new golf cart storage building. And in order to do that, they've actually turned in 3 different applications: a site and design review, a conditional use permit, which is related to what we're terming the accessory uses to a golf course. And then they also turned in a planned unit development application, primarily for the purpose that if you were to apply the planned unit overlay to this area of the country club, not the golf course itself, but where the country club and parking lot are at, it does list in our code specifically a swimming pool as being an allowed use within a PUD residential overlay. And the code does allow that to be applied to any underlying residential zone district. But generally, it's done with lots that are over 2 acres in size. And In this particular case, I might mention now that within the staff report, staff determined that reading through our planned unit development regulations, it didn't really make sense to only designate the developed country club area as a PUD. What would make sense is if the entire golf course, including the 18-hole golf course, and its surrounding housing and facilities were all a master planned unit development. And then, because what you do then is you cluster the houses around them, but that isn't apparently how the Willamette Valley Country Club came about. It was, the houses came later. And so the golf course was built on its own and stood on its own back in early 60s. And so it's got quite a long history. Therefore, we decided that it wasn't really appropriate after we got into reviewing to have a planned unit development. So very unusual, we're asking that you discount or discard the PUD application and the use issue that they were utilizing it for a swimming pool, that you cover that under the conditional use permit, along with the cart storage area and the fitness building and the associated pavilion that they're doing. And you analyze with the conditional use what kind of uses are typically associated with a golf course, and can you consider these uses typical accessory type uses to a country club or a golf facility. And if you think that they're outside the bounds, then you can deny the conditional use because this is an underlying R1 zone. And that's another issue that we can't do anything about today, but our comprehensive plan actually designates the majority of the golf course as private recreation. Unfortunately, back in the 60s, when the comp plan was created, they did not create a corresponding zoning district in the development code to go with that private recreation district for whatever reason. Therefore, they gave them R1 zoning. And that's not really germane to this application right now, other than it's an interesting feature when we do our buildable land study, is that we have, I forget how many acres it is. This entire golf course could, at any point, if it's no longer profitable, they could sell it for residential land development. And if they're smart, they would be thinking about that if they ever run into problems. Right now, they're doing fine. But for our future, we can't expand our urban growth boundary as long as we have this available R1 zone property. So it's just a side issue. This is indicating where the Willamette Valley Country Club is in its entirety, out on North Maple on the east side, north of Territorial Road. This slide shows in the red slashed marks the tax lots that we had them consider as the developable area, the area that has the existing country club facilities and the parking lot and drive and the golf cart buildings and such, the improvements that are associated with the rest of the actual golf course are all located in this area. That gave them a way to judge our site and design review requirements and our matrix that gives you extra points for the quality of development that you're proposing and gives you an assessment of whether they're meeting their landscape requirements within this developed area, so to speak, and whether they're landscaping their parking lot properly. And our assessment agreed with their submittal that they were meeting all the site and design review requirements that are in our code for this defined area, excluding the golf course itself. We had to make that defined area in order to apply the code and to make it make any sense. The proposal here, the site plan that we have on the screen here is what they're proposing. It's the latest, greatest. Unfortunately, staff has to apologize for the notice that went out to all the surrounding property owners, and that the actual summary of information was correct, but we went ahead and attached a site plan, but we attached the pre-application site plan, which they subsequently changed before they turned in their application. And what it did was it took the location of the pool and the fitness building, and they flipped it with the original plan at the pre-app was a parking lot where the swimming pool is. And the building was down further south where they now have the expanded parking lot just to the south. So they've been flipped, and unfortunately that's caused considerable confusion to those people that studied the plan in detail. And they said, well, this isn't what you said you were building, because they accidentally went back to the early plan. So I wanted to point that out and apologize for that having happened. The plan as it is places the pool and the fitness building, at the far eastern edge, so that there is only one residential home directly to the south that actually abuts the new building and such. And that may have been one of the discussions they had. I wasn't privy to that as to why they flipped, is that they're trying to make an effort to control the impact against those residential homes that are directly to the south. This plan that they're proposing now actually increases the buffer that's between the proposed building that I understand, I guess, is a 25-foot height. So, I mean, it is a fairly substantial sized building. But staff has, in the process, has generally thought of the building as being a reasonable thing that might happen on an adjacent property that has a golf course, no matter what the use, might be. They've set it 15 feet off. That's for you to determine if you think that's an adequate buffer distance from the adjacent properties. It's certainly greater than what the previous pre-app plan showed. And it's also further away from more of the residences. And the building serves as a sound barrier, so to speak, to the outdoor aspect, which is the swimming pool. And that's probably where any possible noise issues would come about, is during the summer when there's lots of use for the outdoor pool. So we think the arrangement is probably good from that standpoint. We did have some written testimony, somewhat concerned about just the air conditioning units and that kind of thing on the building itself being in proximity to a house or two. And I don't know, there may be possibility of making sure those units, I don't know where they're going to be mounted. I did not check that. I didn't actually do this report. The associate planner did. So I don't know whether it's the sound that they're really worried about, or possibly even the visual aspect. I don't know if they're mounted on top of the building or where. They're One of the other issues, excuse me, I'm losing my voice now. They're adding a total of, I believe it was 32 parking spaces around the swimming pool, and then another 22 spaces over on the opposite end of the parking. So giving a total of 60 new parking spaces. Their primary argument has been, and it is documented in the staff report, that the country club has a maximum membership that's allowed right now. Was a condition of approval of their previous conditional use permit. And so they're not able to exceed that limit. I don't recall what it is right now. But so what they're indicating is that they're expecting fuller utilization of their facility with the extra activities that the fitness center and the pool will allow. That will result in increased traffic because their current members will be coming more often. And maybe the whole family, instead of just one person coming for golf, maybe the whole family will come now because the others will go to the fitness center at the same time somebody's golfing. So there will be some increased traffic on the adjacent street, and that's been a concern. As you know, we went through the residential subdivision on the end of North Maple, and you know the concerns about the entire length of Maple Street all the way to Territorial Road. And so that issue is still there even with this, but maybe less so because they're not increasing their membership. They're more fully utilizing and giving them a wider choice of activities and such to entice them to stay a member of this facility. At some point, if they feel like they need to, they may try to change that membership. They'd have to go through an application process to do that. But one of the reasons, my understanding is, that membership limit was placed there is because of the substandard street that actually North Maple represents today. And that's why it was placed on there. The other thing the staff report pointed out, if you look through the entire thing, is that they've asked for an outdoor swimming pool before through a conditional use permit, and they were actually denied. And I don't remember exactly, I think it's noted in the staff report, a couple of the reasons for denial, but there was some concern about the compatibility with the adjacent residential uses, and there was some concern about additional traffic on the substandard street. I'm not sure if there were any other issues discussed. But the applicant, in this particular rendition, it's quite different than what was proposed before, and we feel like it's a good layout for the proposal. And you can see that they're utilizing the non-golf area except some green space out towards Maple Street pretty tightly in here now, and yet still trying to retain that lush country club atmosphere. And so, you know, they'll start to lose that if they try to squeeze too much more on this particular area, it would seem, unless it's out towards the street further where there's still green space there. They've indicated, and maybe the applicant will need to clarify this, because the associate planner had said in their text that they talked about rebuilding the sidewalk along the Maple Street frontage. I don't know if they're really saying, and we're requiring, that they meet ADA standards that aren't met today wherever the ends of the sidewalks and where they meet the streets, or whether they really are planning, I don't know what the condition of that sidewalk is, reconstruction of that entire sidewalk. So I'd like that clarification. as to what they were really proposing and what you think they might need to do. The sidewalk that exists is actually located outside of the right-of-way that's present. They put it back up on their own property originally when it was constructed, when the country club was built, I guess. I'm trying to think what else came up. There was one public input that received that wasn't included in your packet that you had an opportunity to review. This came in very recently. And this one is from David and Sherry Brost, and it is in front of you on the dais. And their main concern was that they got confused by the flip in the two plans. They were looking at the old pre-app plan when they were shown the correct plan and thought they had switched back to it. So that was their main concern. They also actually, I'm a little bit confused as to whether they are adjacent to the parking lot now rather than the building. And so they may be here tonight and they can explain that. But they were somewhat concerned about the size of the building and how close it was to them, but the way they described it, that concern was based upon the pre-app plan, not this plan. So hopefully they're here and they can further explain that, or if you can understand reading their input here. So on the recommendation then, we already covered the fact that we would strongly encourage you to just delete the PUD part and not act on that because it's not needed. We have recommended approval of the design review. We think that they demonstrated full compliance with the design review standards and parking lot configuration and landscaping for the site and the parking lot, and the design of the structure itself seems fine. We did not make a recommendation to you on the conditional use permit, primarily because they didn't really provide a narrative explaining the review criteria and how they felt they met that. We've encouraged them to explain to you how this facility is different than the facility that was previously proposed. And we'll let you make your own judgment as to whether you think these uses that they're proposing are considered normal accessory uses, because they're not listed as uses in an R1 zone. So you need to consider that they are normal accessory uses to a golf club. With that in mind, is there any questions for staff?
So I do. On the PUD portion of it, you're encouraging us to just eliminate that?
Yeah, we would think it's inappropriate by reading through our PUD ordinance to apply a PUD overlay to this proposal. And I can't remember, we may have even implied that it might be appropriate at the pre-app, but now that we've studied it in detail, we're thinking that it's not even appropriate to utilize a PUD.
We'll hear from the proponents. Is there anybody here that wishes to speak? If you'll state your name and address, please.
Good evening, my name is David Brost, and I live at 810 Northeast 23rd Avenue.
You're a proponent, not opponent.
A proponent.
You're a proponent.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
And when you're looking at the site map, our property is the one that Brian discussed, and I'm very pleased to see that the site map is changed, flipped, as we saw it in August at the country club. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. So that's very satisfactory. I know the parking lot that's proposed will be somewhat close, but I've also read in the staff report that some of the concerns and questions I had in August are in the staff report, mainly like a little bit of screening on a couple of the parking lot lights. It's great, and then some landscaping. So I think that will help quite a bit with any concerns we had with headlights. And as Brian talked about the R1 zoning, I really would like to see the country club outlive me on the property. We love the green space. We think the country club is a good neighbor, and hope that these improvements will keep them going. So,
Questions? Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that would like to speak as a proponent?
So just a matter of order, usually we let the applicants
Well, that's, okay,
speak first, and so we kind of skipped that.
that's what I meant to, actually. I'm tired, so. Aren't we all? Aren't we all? So, okay, so the applicant, I'm sorry, please forgive me.
My name is David Hyman, principal with Decca Architecture. I'm the architect for the project. Address is 935 Southeast Alder Street in Portland. As I think Brian did a very good job of kind of describing the overall development, I'll just point out in the interest of now considering it as a conditional use instead of the PUD, the reasons for adding this facility. This is about a 4,700 square foot fitness center. Private clubs in general are sort of like businesses that have to kind of compete, have to remain competitive and provide amenities that other clubs are providing. Fitness centers are becoming more and more common in private clubs, also pools as well. Most of the private clubs in the state, probably 80% of them, have pools, so that's another one of the motivations for doing this. Some of the issues that Brian asked us to address, one, I just want to kind of go through them one by one. Somebody had mentioned air conditioning units. They're going to be to the north of the building, to the north of that L on the west side. So that will be further shielded from the neighbors and directed towards the other side, towards the club. The parking has, in addition to the buffering that you see there, just because of the natural grades, is going to be recessed about 3 feet. So that'll further block any headlights and light bleeding over into adjacent neighborhood houses and yards. And then I think you'd also asked to clarify the sidewalk. We're not actually proposing rebuilding the sidewalk. At the pre-app conference, the pre-application conference, that we were asked to provide handicap access to the sidewalk on both sides. So really all we're proposing is a ramp, it's sort of a handicap sidewalk ramp on the north end of that sidewalk and the south end of the sidewalk. So that's, and because the sidewalk is on the club's property, there'd be no necessity unless we were required to do that, to rebuild that sidewalk. I think those were the main issues. If you could flip to, there's a couple other slides that we introduced. Yeah, so just the criteria for the conditional use, there's 4 major criteria that we just wanted to address. It says that the proposal will be consistent with the policies of the comp plan and the requirements of this title and other applicable policies of the city. So as Brian described, it's an R1 zone. In the comp plan, it's LDR, which is low density residential, and in the course is private recreational. And the zone is R1, so we are a conditional use in an R1 zone. Compatible. It's been that way for as long as the club has been around. So I think we're in compliance with the comp plan. It says that the characteristics of the site are suitable for the proposed uses considering size, shape, design, location, topography, existence of improvements, and natural features. It's a large site with generous open space. We've placed the building in the site plan at kind of the topographical low point of the site and shielded as much as possible from the pool from the adjacent neighbors. So we're kind of using the topography, the trees, the natural landscape to further support that. At the neighborhood meeting that we had with some of the neighbors, they had asked us, one is to address issues of light, which I described from cars parking on it. The other was to create in certain areas a more naturalistic landscape. So we've done that. I guess we'd have to go back to show you that. But we've basically put in a buffer, a landscape buffer across the entire south end of the site. But we've also created a kind of it ends in a kind of a more naturalistic landscape zone on the west side. So it's a variegated. It's not just a wall. It's a buffer, but it also provides kind of a landscape amenity for the neighbors more to the west. We were also asked to fence the pool. There was some consideration of just safety and protection for the pool area. We've done that. We've provided that. That was in reaction to some of the comments at the neighborhood meeting. So I think we've gone to great lengths to sort of address some of those issues. I'll just point out this is the 2002 plan that was denied. I wasn't a part of that, but you can see the difference, and it's in generally a similar location, but the pool faces the neighborhood. So there was, I think, my understanding was that was one of the major objections to it, was just the noise from the pool facing the neighbors. So we went to great lengths to kind of flip the building, create it an L shape instead of a bar, so it really kind of protects it, protects the neighbors from any kind of direct relationship with the pool. All the noise will go to the east and to the north. And we hired an acoustical engineer to kind of analyze the effect of that pool. And his estimate was, with the buffering of the building and the landscape and the distance of the building, which is the pool is 75 feet from the property line, that the highest average level of decibels would be 48 to 55 dB, which is less than a normal air conditioner. An air conditioner is considered 60 dB decibels. So it should be a very effective buffer for noise. Now, sorry, to go back to the conditions again. It says all required public facilities and services exist to adequately meet the needs of the proposed development. The utilities are perfectly adequate to support this additional 4,600 square foot building and the other features that we're proposing. As Brian described, it may have some traffic impact, but it's really negligible. The whole point of doing this is not to increase membership, it's to provide better amenities for existing membership, and that may result in some negligible traffic increase, but that's we don't anticipate that to be very much. And then finally, the proposed use will not alter the character of the surrounding areas in a manner which substantially limits or precludes the use of surrounding properties for the uses as permitted in this zone. And I think I've really covered most of that, is how we've been respectful of the neighbors and designed this in such a way and created a site plan in such a way that it really minimizes the impact on the neighborhood.
Any questions? Again, I apologize for going down.
No problem.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you very much. Now we'll get back into order. I've already had some proponents. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak in favor of this? Okay. I have Mr. Bob. You're up. Well, we're not even charging you, so.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
Isn't that nice?
I guess I've got a similar message. I am Bob Canberra. I live on 1338 North Maple and utilize Maple Street a lot for various reasons: running, biking, walking, and even trying to continue my transportation needs on from Maple onto Territorial. I'm sure all of you are well aware of Maple between Territorial and this golf course. And I'm not necessarily opposed to this beautiful plan that they have here, and the beauty of the golf course is. What I am is continuously the same kind of problem with all developments around our town. We are not taking to account the situation further down that is being made worse, which is the impact of traffic that's going to have between Maple, Territorial, and this golf course. We have added a 20-something more homes down there that are going to already been approved and are going to generate a lot of traffic, in my mind. This golf course, it says there's going to be negligible traffic increase. Well, sorry. People who's going to use a swimming pool? The younger people and the family as a whole, who aren't necessarily going golfing. Or who's going to go to a recreational facility? I am a member of one. I know that the whole family will go, who might not be golfers. That means that there'll be more traffic going up and down that street that weren't ordinarily going to golf, okay? So that means that traffic's going to be increasing. That means that the cars trying to get onto Territorial are going to be increased. If you're unfamiliar with this area, I have some pictures that you can take a look at about pedestrians trying to walk this area, how dangerous it presently is. Now, the increasing of cars will make it even worse for pedestrians trying to walk up this area. So you will hear me again and again at a lot of these meetings where the same kinds of issues come into play. Can you solve them? I'm not too sure. But I vowed that as a new year starts off, that it was my mission to continue to bring these issues to somebody's attention so somebody does something about this. You know, and you seem to be enjoyed by metaphors. The condition of this street was poor to start off with, strike one. We just approved a development down the road, so that's strike through against that roadway. Now we're intending to increase the use of this golf course that will increase further traffic. That's strike three. In most baseball games, that's an out. Thank you. Any questions?
On the traffic issue, I got to tell you, you're preaching to the choir here, but I will say this, that I have been up and down Maple many times, and I've been to the golf course a few times myself. I think it's a beautiful facility, but yes, I understand the traffic situation. Any questions for Bob? No. There you go. Thank you very much. Anybody that considers themselves neutral on this matter that wishes to speak? Any rebuttal from proponents? Okay. And the matter is closed to the public. No more testimony. And now we'll discuss it and move forward. Any questions, John?
Oh, well, I don't have a question. I have a statement. I too share Bob's concern over the traffic in that area. We've approved several projects recently that are going to compound the problem on Territorial. Again, every time this comes up, I just feel like I'm being stabbed because it's so dear to my heart, because I know what's happening the long term. On the other flip side, I think we need to do everything we can to preserve the facility and enhance their ability to compete, because if we think things are bad now, think what it would be if they were to sell that, since it's zoned R1 and that turned into a development. You think you got problems on Maple now in Territorial. watch out. So based on that, I'm in favor of this action.
I'm in favor of it. I think it's a good ad. I think it's appropriate use. I think from a competitive, I agree with you that, you know, they've got to stay competitive, but I don't know many country clubs that don't have a pool and exercise facility.
Correct.
I agree as well, and with the walking path and the other improvements that should be coming along Maple shortly with that new development, that should hopefully alleviate some of the tension on that road. Maybe not all of it, but some.
I have no comments.
Me either.
I have one more comment. Sure. I'll direct this at Bob. I was looking at the Canby website here on the front page. There is numerous committees, and one of the committees is the bike, no, not that one. Well, there's Bike and Pedestrian Committee, and there's also a roads, what's the title of it? Gosh, thank you very much. Yes, that committee. So I would highly recommend, if you have these strong views, that you avail yourself to one of these committees and work towards your goal.
This time I will consider a proposal to approve this.
Mr. Chair, I'll motion to approve DR 17-07 and CUP 17-06 with deletion of PUD 17-01.
Second.
And a clarification, we need to modify condition number 3, where it currently says applicant shall construct the existing sidewalk across the full frontage of Maple Street. I think we're satisfied that if it's in good condition, which I can't verify, that what we're requiring in the city engineer's memo, which is cited, is that they create ADA compliant ramps that it doesn't have currently. And that would be the rewrite for that condition, is that the applicant shall construct ADA compliant ramps with the sidewalks along the frontage of Maple Street. Unless you feel like they need to reconstruct it.
I'll add that to my motion to modify stipulation number 3, that they do not need to redo the sidewalks that are there, but just place ADA appropriate ramps.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Okay. We will now consider a request for a text amendment, TA 17-01, to change the name of the Historic Review Board and increase board membership by adding one non-voting position for a Canby High School student. I get to read something differently. No, you could just be comfy. The matter presently before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please step forward to the microphone at the appropriate time and state your name and interest in the matter. Please be sure to sign the testimony sheet. Did you sign the testimony sheet?
No,
It says right here you got to do that.
but I'm staff.
Are you going to testify?
No, I'm doing the staff report.
Okay. Okay. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access. All written testimony received both for and against shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, we'll have the staff report. You're all ready to go, I can tell. Then questions by us. Open public hearing for testimony. Proponents not more than whatever time. There's no time limit here. Let's just say 5 minutes. Opponents not more than 5 minutes, and then we'll close the public testimony. Questions, if any, by us, discussion by us, and then a decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. No questions. You move right ahead.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jamie Stickle. I'm the Main Street Manager, and I serve as the staff liaison for the city's Historic Review Board. And so we come before you today to ask for a text amendment to address 3 different things that the Historic Review Board has deemed appropriate. So the first one is adding a student member, and I'll go back and get into further detail, but the first one is adding a student member. The second one is changing the title of the Historic Review Board. And then the third is adding some verbiage about chair, vice chair. And I'm sad that Bob left because I was going to note that none of these have, it's a negligible traffic increase. So, you know, there's not going to be any issues with that.
He probably felt the vibes of that.
And he is on the Traffic Safety Committee.
It has been.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's putting his money where his mouth is. The city's Historic Review Board has worked a lot with students and youth in the community. And so through that, we actually acquired someone who was a teacher in the Canby School District, Tony Crawford. And we really started to talk about how we could engage youth on a more consistent basis, other than usually it's an event, or for instance, when we brought before the city council putting the city hall on the local register, we had children testify because in 3rd grade they learn about Canby's history as part of their curriculum. It's a way that we can foster civic engagement at a young age, and also it allows the children to get engaged, but also to potentially fulfill some of their community service that they have to do at the high school. So then moving on to the second one, and this is Carol Palmer. She's our chair, and she will probably have more eloquent additions, but I'll just go over the main points. And then as far as the title change, one of the reasons we wanted to change the name is that the Historic Review Board doesn't quite represent what the body has been doing, and it's very confusing with the City of Canby's, or no, see, I did it, with the Historical Society. That has nothing to do with the City of Canby, other than we have a good relationship. And so while we have certain aspects that we do through grants and through other, well, most of our work that we do is through grants, to be able to identify in the community as what exactly the board is, what they're doing, the change is suggested to be the Heritage and Landmarks Commission, which is very consistent across the state of Oregon with other boards like this one. It helps to also create, or more accurately describe, the efforts of the board and then create that identity. We work with the Historical Society as well as other boards and commissions and organizations throughout Canby, but there are times that Carol and I or other board members will go and present in front of a board, and we'll do what we think is a really good job of explaining exactly what they do, and they say, okay, but can you get the museum to stay open a little bit longer? And that's not within our jurisdiction. So it just gives us a better identity. And then the last is adding some verbiage about chair, vice chair. When we were talking with the city recorder about coming to you and doing this text amendment, we found that our text was not really consistent with the other boards and commissions, and so that just allows us to have the rules that other boards and commissions have in our code. Well, I'm from New Jersey, and I drink a lot of coffee, so it's always a little fast, but if you have any questions, I'm happy, or Carol can answer as well.
It's early.
Do we have any questions? I can't talk that fast. I can listen that fast. I can't talk that. Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. We'll close it, and I will.
I have one question, Chair.
Okay.
I'm a member of this Historical Review Board body, and is there going to be a conflict if I vote on this?
I'm going to, John, I'm going to say that your good faith effort to say be neutral will be duly noted and you can vote. How's
I
that?
shall remain neutral then.
Okay.
I was going to say, when he said he had a question, I'm thinking, you were at the meetings, man. No. That's a good question to have.
All righty. No further questions. Why don't we get right to deliberate? I will entertain a motion to request for a text amendment TA 17-01 to change the name of the Historic Review Board and increase the board membership by adding one non-voting position for a Canby High School student.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve TA 17-01, changing the name of the Historic Review Board, increasing the board membership by adding one non-voting position to the Canby High School, as a Canby High School student, and requesting a text amendment.
Second.
I'd second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. New
Thank
name.
you.
You're welcome. Okay, we'll move along to final decisions. First will be the Redwood Landing subdivision, SUB 17-06. Entertain a motion to make a final decision on that.
Chair, I recommend Redwood Landings subdivision, SUB 1706, be approved as it has been read.
You have a second?
Second.
Can you clarify that I don't remember now myself, but we changed some condition when we
Right,
approved
with
it?
the, so I put
Conditions
as
as
read
noted.
before.
Okay,
So,
great.
yes.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I will now entertain a motion for a final decision on the Willamette Valley Country Club DR 17-07 /CUP 17-06.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve our final decision on DR 17-07 and CUP 17-06 with the deletion of PUD 17-01 and the changing of the criteria for number 3, that the sidewalks do not have to be redone, just ADA ramps.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And finally, we will entertain a motion for the Historic Review Board TA 17-01.
Mr. Chair, I move that we finalize the approval of the Historic Review Board TA 17-01.
Second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So items of interest from staff, it says here that we aren't going to meet on December 25th. What's with that?
Isn't that a surprise?
Really? I took that day off for nothing?
Okay. And then the first regularly scheduled meeting will be in 2018 on January 8th, correct? Okay.
I will not be present in that meeting.
Okay. You'll be out having fun somewhere. Yes. Okay. Any items of interest or guidance from us to Brian? I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chair, a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There you go. Thank you very much. Everybody have a Merry Christmas.
Yes, Merry Christmas.